Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome you once again to Midnight Nightmare. Please take your seats, relax, and enjoy the thrilling story. But before we begin, please consider giving us your like. I will truly be very grateful to you. It was 15 years ago that I led a group of Boy Scouts into the Georgia wilderness on what was supposed to be a week-long survival trip. I was 25 years old at the time and working as a wilderness guide, leading camping and rafting trips throughout the southern Appalachians. There's nothing quite like imparting woodlore and survival skills to eager students, especially the wide-eyed adolescent scouts who viewed me as an awe-inspiring wilderness guru. This would be my first time guiding Troop 119, a group of scouts from Atlanta venturing out on their first overnight backcountry excursion. I aimed to make it a trip they'd never forget. We departed on a crisp Saturday in late September, the leaves just starting to kindle with autumnal fire. There were 12 scouts altogether, accompanied by 2 parental chaperones and myself as their guide and mentor. As we drove west from Atlanta into the Chattahoochee National Forest, I studied the boys through my rearview mirror. They were a boisterous but good-natured bunch, all around 12 years old, their faces glowing with excitement for the adventures ahead. Jason was the observant one, already studying the passing terrain through sharp eyes. Ben's ready laughter filled the van at every joke. The Martin twins, Michael and Patrick, were mischievous pranksters, pushing and jostling each other when they thought no one was looking. Young Thomas clung anxiously to his father, Mr. Woodson, one of the chaperones. I made a mental note to give Thomas extra encouragement, sensing his hesitation. After 2 hours on the road, we pulled up to the trailhead parking area. The forest rose around us, lush and primordial. I instructed the boys to pack only essentials into their backpacks for the 6-mile trek to our campsite. Once satisfied with their pared-down gear, we hit the trail. At first, the boys stuck together in a tight knot, jumpy at any unfamiliar forest sound. But as the miles rolled by uneventfully, the group began to spread out and relax. Some brief bravado even led young Ian to bound ahead, loudly proclaiming he would scout the route for dangers. I gently reined in his zeal, getting a kick out of his spirit. We reached the camp, tucked against a sloping hillside and surrounded by soaring pines. A cold mountain stream burbled nearby, perfect for filtering drinking water. I set the boys to clearing rocks and sticks to make tent space while I built a campfire ring. Soon flames crackled merrily as the scouts excitedly pitched their tents for the first time. That evening, after foraging the woods for kindling, I cooked a humble dinner for the group over the fire, letting the scouts take turns stirring our tinfoil meals. Their delighted faces glowed in the firelight as they devoured every morsel. Nothing fancy, potatoes, carrots, and beef, but the boys appreciated it like a 4-course feast after the day's hike. Bellies full, we settled around the flickering fire for introductions and storytelling. One by one, I had each scout tell me about himself, his interests, goals, and what he hoped to gain from this wilderness experience. Many came from single-parent homes and were seeking role models and fellowship. I vowed to make this trip unforgettable for them. As the flames faded to embers, I lowered my voice to share spooky legends about the forest, weaving tales of hauntings, mysterious creatures, and strange disappearances. The boys listened in engaged attention, faces bathed in firelight. They slept heavily that night, dreaming of adventure. The first full day of our survival trip started off bright and early. After a hearty breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, I gathered the troop of scouts together to begin imparting some basic wilderness skills that might just save their lives if they ever got lost in the woods. I decided to start by teaching them how to forage for food. We hiked out into the surrounding forest, and I pointed out various edible plants and mushrooms they could keep an eye out for if they were ever without rations. The boys were fascinated and a little hesitant as I showed them which plants were safe to eat. Young Ian even tried nibbling on a wild onion shoot before making a funny face at the tangy flavor. Next, I demonstrated how to construct basic wilderness shelters. From building a simple, I put the scouts to work gathering materials from the forest floor and had them team up to put the skills into practice. It was comical watching their first attempts at lashing together branches into crude lean-tos that immediately collapsed on top of giggling scouts. But eventually they got the hang of constructing more stable shelters. I could see them gaining confidence in their new abilities. As evening fell, we headed back to our campsite. and I let the scouts gather tinder and kindling to start a campfire. Together we searched for wild onions and mushrooms to fashion up a humble forest stew in a pot over the fire. Despite the simple ingredients, the scouts were thrilled to eat a meal they had sourced directly from nature. After cleaning up, we all settled down around the crackling fire, its glow illuminating a circle of bright young faces. I let the scouts take turns telling stories and tales from their lives back home. Many of them opened up around the fire, sharing hopes and dreams or things troubling them. Others told funny stories that had us all keeling over with laughter under the stars. I soaked it all in, letting the teachings of the day settle into their minds. This is what I lived for as a wilderness guide, helping foster confidence and community while imparting practical skills. As the embers faded, I sent the scouts off to their tents to rest up for the lessons and adventures of the next day. I had a feeling they were going to pick up the skills quickly. The following morning, after breakfast, I decided it was time to teach the basics of wilderness navigation and tracking. These were skills that could save their lives if they ever became lost in the woods. The boys were vibrating with pent-up energy, so I made it into a game. I had them partner up and gave each pair a miniature compass. Then I let them take turns leading each other blindfolded along a looping route I marked through the forest, using only the compass for guidance. Many ended up wandering in circles at first, but soon got the hang of using the compass points to stay oriented as they directed their blindfolded partners. In a small clearing, I gave a lesson on recognizing and deciphering animal tracks, teaching them the differences between the prints of various mammals and birds that inhabited the forest. We then fanned out in teams to search the area, competing to see who could locate and identify the most tracks correctly. Ben ended up winning, picking up on subtle signs of passing deer, rabbits, squirrels, and even an elusive fox. Already these scouts were proving themselves quick studies. We spent the rest of the morning mastering the age-old wilderness skills of setting traps and snares. I walked them through the steps of placing bait inside cleverly crafted slip knots, or cages balanced with sticks that would tumble when prey entered. Their inventions grew more inventive by the hour. Soon, several triumphantly brought to me squirming rodents caught in their snares as I looked on proudly. That evening, after another campfire dinner, the scouts worked together to perform hilarious skits and songs about the day's exploits. Their banter and friendship warmed my heart. Already they were bonding like brothers. As I tucked them into their tents that night, their minds were abuzz with all the knowledge absorbed and wonders witnessed, from animal tracks at dawn to constellations wheeling above their campsite. As I made my final patrol of the camp perimeter, I noticed a stirring in the trees just beyond the ring of firelight. I paused, squinting into the dense woods until a shape seemed to detach itself from the shadows. It stood tall and upright behind a pine trunk, too still to be any forest animal. The hair on my neck prickled as its dark form watched me from across the clearing. Then, in a blink, it seemed to dissolve back into the darkness, leaving me wondering if it had been some trick of the moving shadows and moonlight. Probably just a stump or fallen log my eyes had momentarily given a human outline to. Morning dawned clear and crisp on the third day of our wilderness excursion. A light frost clung to the grass as the scouts emerged sleepily from their tents, lured by the scent of frying bacon and percolating coffee. After breakfast, I gathered the troop and led them downstream to try their hands at fishing. We came to a wide bend in the river that looked promising. I demonstrated how to thread a worm onto a hook, cast out a line, and then reel in struggling fish. The scouts picked it up quickly while also splashing each other and laughing. Soon they were whooping triumphantly whenever they landed trout, flopping and shimmering on the riverbank. I showed them how to brain the catch swiftly and humanely. Fish sizzled deliciously over the campfire for lunch. That afternoon, I devoted to teaching the scouts which wild, edible plants might sustain them if lost in the woods without rations. We foraged for fiddlehead ferns, wild leeks and onions, cattail roots, and tart wild berries. The scouts took to sampling everything, getting purple stains from blackberries all around their grinning mouths. I imparted warnings about poisonous plants to avoid as well. Their heads were soon overflowing with new knowledge about nature's bounty, waiting to be harvested by those with the skills and patience. During dinner that evening, as daylight faded, I spotted that now familiar stirring just at the edge of our campfire glow. A shadow seemed to detach itself from the gloom and stand watching, taller than a man. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth, staring back hard until the dark form retreated slowly into the brush like a timid animal. After cleaning up, we gathered around the crackling fire for our nightly storytelling. I decided to share some chilling local legends with the scouts, like tales of the creature they called the backwoods howler said to stalk these parts. The boys listened, enthralled and thrilled to be spooked before bedtime, not realizing my stories were meant to distract myself from the unnerving truth. Later, as I lay in my tent, unable to sleep, I peered out into the darkness searching for any sign of the lurking figure, but for the sigh of wind through branches. As I finally drifted off, I had the creeping sense of being watched from just out of sight. I awoke to shouts and cries of alarm outside my tent. Heart-lurching, I scrambled out into the gray morning light, squinting through sleep-crusted eyes. The scouts were crowded around one of the tents, their voices shrill with panic. "Timmy's gone," Patrick cried, voice breaking. I rushed over, pulse thundering in my ears. Peering into the tent, I saw Timmy's belongings, sleeping bag, lantern, clothes, neatly arranged inside, but no sign of the boy himself. "He's vanished," Michael exclaimed. "We already looked everywhere." My mind raced, struggling to shake off grogginess. Timmy must have disappeared in the night without a trace. But why? How? A chill gripped my spine despite the mild air. More scouts shouted over each other, their words jumbling together incoherently. I raised my hands to quiet the frenzy. Okay, calm down everyone," I said, fighting to keep my own voice steady. "Are we absolutely sure he's not just off in the woods to relieve himself?" A dozen frightened faces turned toward me, eyes wide. Ben spoke up. "We looked all around camp twice over. He's nowhere, and someone would have woken up if he left the tent during the night." His words sent a spike of dread through my chest. The only explanation was unthinkable. Something had taken Timmy, stealing him away while the rest of us slept unaware. The scouts bombarded me with questions, demanding explanations I did not have. What happened to him? Where did he go? We have to find him. I raised my hands again, pleading for quiet. My mind reeled, groping for plausible excuses to cling to: sleepwalking, a midnight bathroom trip gone wrong. But in my bones, I knew the truth. A sinister entity lurked in these woods, and now it had claimed a young life. "I need you all to stay calm and stick together while I think about our next steps," I said, struggling to project a confidence I did not feel. Their frightened faces searched mine for reassurance. Inhaling deeply, I continued. "It seems Timmy left camp during the night unexpectedly, but we will organize search parties to look for him after sunrise. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." My hollow words did little to curb their panic. They huddled close, staring wide-eyed into the encroaching forest. I too found my gaze drawn to the shadowy tree line, unable to shake the crawling sensation of being watched. The right choice was suddenly painfully clear. We had to flee this cursed place before the malevolent entity claimed another innocent. "Pack up camp now," I ordered, urgency edging my tone. "We're leaving immediately." Confusion flashed across their faces, followed by conflicted relief. They scrambled to take down tents and gather equipment with shaky hands. I hastily kicked dirt over the smoldering fire pit, then helped the scouts load up their packs. All the while I scanned the gloomy woods, expecting the tall, shadowy figure to emerge at any moment. Finally, we were ready. The boys looked to me anxiously, faces drawn. "Stay close and stick together," I said firmly. "We're getting out of here." A tight knot of nervous energy. I brought up the rear, constantly glancing back over my shoulder. Right before the forest swallowed up the abandoned campsite, I glimpsed a dark shape detach itself from a tree and stand watching. My heart seized. Then it turned and melted into the shadows. I led the scouts onward through the winding forest trails, anxious to put distance between us and the ominous entity that had taken Timmy. My compass and memories should have guided us northwest to the ranger station, but the further we hiked, the more disoriented I became. The land just didn't seem right. Creeks were on the wrong side, the shape of rock outcroppings was unfamiliar. It was as if the very landscape had changed and rearranged itself while our backs were turned. By late afternoon, with morale sinking, I finally had to admit we were lost. As I called for a rest break and attempted to radio the ranger station for guidance, but all that answered was a static hiss. No signal could penetrate this deep into the woods. The scouts practically collapsed onto mossy logs, faces drawn with exhaustion. We had been pushing a brutal pace in our desperation to escape, but now we were well and truly turned around. Just a quick breather to rest your feet. Then we'll keep going a bit further before making camp, I assured them, trying to mask the defeat in my voice. In truth, as the light faded, I knew we'd have to stop for the night soon. There would be no more progress until sunrise. I scouted the area as the boys wolfed down granola bars and refilled canteens from a burbling stream. Before long, I located a small clearing nestled between towering pines that could serve as our campsite. It wasn't ideal. The forest floor was rocky and sloped slightly, but it would have to do. We had no choice but to stay put for the night. As the scouts wearily pitched their tents and laid out bedrolls, I tried to boost their sagging spirits. Come on, guys, look lively. This is all just part of the adventure. We'll get our bearings tomorrow and be at the ranger station in no time. A few managed weak smiles, but a darkness still hung over us. We ate a cold dinner of jerky and trail mix in silence. Normally, there would be jokes and banter around the campfire, but tonight no one felt much like laughing. We just stared into the flickering flames, our minds left to imagine what sinister forms might lurk in the dancing shadows just beyond the firelight. Eventually, I corralled the scouts off to their tents, insisting that a good night's rest would refresh us all. But I had my doubts. The woods pressed in around our little island of light, and though I strained my ears against the silence, I heard nothing besides the usual sounds of crickets and wind through the branches. It was well past midnight and my watch was almost over. The surrounding forest was still except for the usual night sounds, the drone of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, or the rustle of a creature in the underbrush. The scouts were all bundled in their tents, exhausted from another day of fruitless hiking in circles trying to find our way out. The campfire had died down to embers that cast a weak, flickering glow across our small clearing. Fatigue weighed heavily on me as I huddled by the fading flames, struggling valiantly to keep my eyelids from drooping. Lack of sleep from the past week of fear and flight had crept into my bones, sapping my alertness. I shook myself forcefully, trying to regain focus. I couldn't allow weariness to dull my reactions with danger still lurking just out of sight. I stood slowly, joints stiff and aching, and began to quietly patrol the camp perimeter, hoping the chill night air would revive me. But it was no use. Bone-deep exhaustion had taken hold. As I checked the snares and noise traps I had set up earlier, I nearly stumbled over an exposed root jutting from the ground. Cursing myself for the lapse in caution, I steadied against a tree trunk and squinted into the shadows between the skeletal branches. That's when a branch cracked sharply somewhere in the darkness behind me. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat, senses screaming alert once more. I stared wildly about, flashlight beams stabbing through the gloom, but nothing stirred besides wind through the gnarled boughs. Only an impenetrable void met my gaze no matter where I shone the quivering light. And yet, some instinct told me something had been there just a second ago, lurking at the edge of vision. The very air had gone deathly silent as if the forest held its breath. The fine hairs on my neck prickled. I swept the area again, gripping the flashlight like a talisman to ward off evil, but the shadows yielded nothing. Unease crept over me, like icy fingers down my spine. Some sinister presence was out there, concealed just steps away. I could feel its lurking menace permeating the night. I backed toward camp, skin crawling, senses straining for the slightest hint of movement, but the entity remained maddeningly elusive, while making its presence undeniably felt. My nerves were frayed to breaking point. Sleep evaded me as I lay rigid in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest through the thin nylon walls. Each creak of a branch or rustle in the brush set my heart thudding, anticipating the bone-chilling shriek of something inhuman piercing the night. I strained my ears until they ached, both dreading and wishing some unnatural wail would shatter the silence so I would at least know where the lurking evil hid. But nothing revealed itself. The anticipation was a torture in itself. Exhaustion tugged at me, but whenever I slid toward restless sleep, images of glowing eyes and gnarled hands emerging from the shadows jolted me alert once more. So I focused on the scouts' steady breathing and the dying fires crackled just outside, a feeble reassurance we were not alone in the smothering dark. Dawn could not come soon enough. The instant murky light seeped into the woods. I awakened the scouts. They emerged from their tents with pale skin and deep shadows under their hollow eyes. It was clear no one had slept well, if at all, but there was a frantic energy to their movements as they choked down breakfast granola bars and packed up camp. I could see the fear simmering just beneath the surface. We all could feel the sinister presence lurking somewhere just out of sight, obscured by night but not gone with daylight. The evil lurked all around us and seeped into the very bones of the land. The sun's return lent only an illusion of safety, but we clung to it desperately. Soon we were hurrying back down the trail, glancing anxiously over our shoulders, but the daylight buoyed our spirits some. The sunshine and chatter of birds washed away last night's oppressive aura of malice. Some color returned to the boys' cheeks. By mid-morning we came upon a familiar log bridge spanning a roaring creek. Moss covered the gray-weathered wood, but I recognized its length and curve. "The trailhead can't be far now," Ben exclaimed, a note of hope in his voice for the first time in days. The group picked up pace, renewed vigor and purpose in their stride. Our goal was so close, tantalizingly within reach. Freedom from the endlessly looping, unnatural forest. But I knew in my heart the woods would not release us so easily. As we turned a bend in the trail, I braced myself and gripped my walking stick tighter, senses primed for the next attack. Perhaps this time we could face it in daylight while our spirits retained some hope. But hope was a slippery thing out here, dwindling the deeper we ventured through the trackless trees and shadows. Whatever lurked in the forest would not stop until it had claimed us all, in body or soul. It was only a matter of time, no matter how tightly I grasped at optimism to keep the darkness at bay. But as we rounded a bend, a towering oak suddenly blocked the path. The leaves were still green. This had happened recently. The scouts backpedaled with frightened cries. Dread congealed in my stomach, but inwardly my mind reeled. There was no denying it any longer. A sinister intelligence haunted these woods, and it did not want us to leave. I turned to study the looming tree, searching for handholds, trying to quiet my racing heart. The scouts shifted nervously, looking to me for guidance, but I had none to give. Never had I faced a foe like this whose attacks came from the very land itself. By the time we edged past the massive obstacle, daylight was already waning. I hesitated, considering whether to keep going or make camp. The woods grew shadowy, the setting sun casting long skeletal fingers between the trees. "Let's keep moving while we still have light," I decided, unwilling to spend another night exposed. "Stay alert and stay together." We pushed on into growing dark, the trail dwindling until we stumbled half-blind through the forest. Strange whispers followed us, branches clawing at our clothes. The scouts drew closer, knuckles white on their walking sticks, eyes glinted from the underbrush. When the last dregs of light seeped away, I called a halt. We would go no further tonight. I tried to reassure the scouts as we made camp, but hollow bravado could not mask the dread gnawing inside me. Our stalker was still out there biding its time, but perhaps I could surprise it first. I set simple snares and noise traps around our perimeter that night, improvising with string and tin cans from our gear. It was a futile attempt to deter an entity that could manipulate the very forest, but I had to try something to regain a sense of control, even if it was just an illusion. We sat around the fire, wrists aching from gripping weapons until flames died down to embers. When nothing disturbed the traps that night, it was somehow worse. The complete silence meant our opponent had changed tactics, lulling us into false security. And it was working. The tense anticipation was fraying our nerves. At this rate, it would not need to strike. Exhaustion and dread would deliver us right to its feet. Doubt and dread sat like stones in my belly. I had failed the boys, led them in circles to the point of exhaustion with no idea how to guide us out. By late afternoon, despair was etched into their sagging faces. The jokes and banter of days past were forgotten now. Silence hung over us like a pall. When I called for a brief rest, some of the boys slumped bonelessly to the forest floor, too spent to go further. Others whispered among themselves, casting suspicious glances my way as their faith in my leadership crumbled. "We've passed that weird-shaped boulder before," Patrick muttered. "We're going in circles." "He has no idea where he's taking us," Jason said quietly. "We'll never get out at this rate." Their doubts stung, even if warranted. Finally, Thomas approached me, eyes downcast. "What if we can't find the trail again? Maybe we should just stay put and wait for a rescue." His words bubbled a rising panic in my chest. Give up out here? Impossible. But anger and frustration boiled over. "We can't just sit and wait," I snapped, harsher than intended. The boys flinched, their morale sinking further at my outburst. Immediately I regretted it. They needed reassurance, not more fear heaped upon them. I drew a long breath and then met each of their eyes. You're right to be worried. We're in a tough spot. But I promise you, we will find our way out together. I won't rest until you're all safe again. They glanced up, a flicker of tentative hope on their faces. Just stick with me a little longer, I urged gently. My confidence was a charade, but it strengthened them. They rose on aching legs, ready to soldier on. Together we could withstand anything, I reminded them. For 2 more hours we hiked until finally I spotted a rocky outcropping up ahead that seemed familiar. My initial hope curdled. I realized it was the same formation we had passed days ago. Dread sank like a stone. We had looped all the way back to where this nightmare started. That night, after setting up camp once again, I let the scouts huddle together for warmth and comfort while I kept watch just outside their tent circle. No fire could penetrate the smothering gloom beneath the dense forest canopies here. The surrounding blackness felt almost corporeal, like a sentient void waiting hungrily to consume us. Some primal sense screamed at me to keep vigil through the small hours, though I doubted by now that any mere mortal alertness could thwart this unseen menace. The weary scouts had collapsed into uneasy sleep, the day's fruitless wanderings having sapped all their energy. But sleep evaded me, my every sense strained to the snapping point, listening for any unnatural sounds. The night was unnaturally still, not even insects or night birds stirring. The silence itself seemed ominous. As the moon traversed the sky, nothing disturbed the heavy quiet. But then near midnight, blood-curdling screams suddenly split the stillness, cries of shock and pain that jolted the very marrow in my bones. I leapt up, racing toward the source before conscious thought could catch up. The screams issued from one of the tents on the far edge of camp, but before I could reach it, a writhing form was dragged forcibly from the tent by an indistinct black shape like living shadow. I seized the flailing boy's arms desperately, managing to snatch him halfway from the churning void's ravenous maw. In the darkness and panic, I still did not know which boy had been taken. "Help me! It's got me!" he shrieked, voice raw with terror. I locked my arms around his chest, straining with all my might. But I could not make sense of what I saw. Just swirling darkness dragging at the boy's legs, no substance or defined shape to fight. This writhing entity had no body, no physical presence, and yet its pull was irresistible. The boy wailed and thrashed like a snared rabbit in its grip. I felt him slipping through my grasp as I strained desperately to wrench him free of the shadows. But the ancient evil's hold was relentless. Our panicked tug of war seemed to stretch on for hours. Finally, by some grace, the entity released its prey and withdrew, dissolving back into the blackness between the trees. I clutched the boy close to my chest, both of us shaking in the ringing silence. Though the entity had retreated for now, I knew the entity still lurked just out of sight, observing us. But slowly, the first pale streaks of dawn began to filter through the canopy, driving back the night. Perhaps we could claw back some fleeting illusion of hope with the light, though the coming day's trials seemed just as daunting. We had survived the longest and darkest night yet, but as I held the traumatized boy, I feared how much more we could endure. Soon enough, more screams would pierce the darkness, and next time I might not be able to wrestle the victim free. That night we huddled together in restless slumber, too exhausted to even post a watch. The impenetrable darkness pressed in oppressively close as we tossed and turned on the hard, cold ground, our minds still haunted by the day's horrors. Every creak of a swaying branch or rustle of undergrowth had me bolting upright, pulse hammering, convinced the swirling void had returned for us. But only the wind's lonely wail met my straining ears each time before I collapsed back into fitful dreams. I cannot say if I slept at all that endless night. Behind my closed lids, vivid flashes of glowing eyes and gnarled claws still tore at me, accompanied by distant screams that echoed bizarrely in the dark forest. I thrashed against my sleeping bag, drifting in and out of consciousness. As the sky gradually lightened from pitch black to dismal gray, I gave up on rest and lay watching the leaves sway overhead, their patterns almost taking on twisted faces and forms in the gloaming. But when true dawn began to come through the dense canopy, I noticed a peculiar gap in the underbrush that most certainly had not been there the night before. Heart thudding, I rose as silently as possible to investigate. Stepping delicately through the wall of ferns and brambles, I saw a relatively clear, narrow, seemingly angling toward a slightly brighter patch of forest ahead. It was badly overgrown in places, nearly obscured by some bushes and fallen branches, but still unmistakably some kind of trail. The first potential sign of escape we had discovered in days. Fragile hope quickened my pulse as I traced its winding route with my eyes. But something in my gut whispered it was too neat, too fortuitous after so many days and nights of hopeless, blundering wandering through the endless woods. This path promised escape, and that was exactly why it could not be trusted out here. The cunning entity had shown mastery over sculpting the very land to manipulate us before. What was to stop it from weaving this trail itself as bait, a snare to lure us deeper into its clutches? I stood weighing my suspicions as the scouts gradually began to stir from sleep and noticed the open gap in front of them. Their excited whispers reached my ears, stabbing through the heavy morning quiet. "A trail! It just appeared overnight," young Ian exclaimed in a rushed undertone. "Do you think it could lead out? Or just lead us farther in?" Jason replied nervously, ever the pragmatic one. "Seems suspicious." Patrick shook his head firmly. "No, it has to go somewhere better than here. This could be our way out, finally." The badly concealed hope in his voice pierced my heart. I knew I would need to temper their rising optimism quickly before desperation sent them rushing heedlessly down this potential trap. We could not afford to be lured blindly into yet another cruel machination of this forest. Not this time, when we clung to life and sanity by such a fragile, fraying thread. Turning back toward the boys, I put on what I hoped was a reassuring expression. As I walked back to rejoin them, crouching down, I met each pair of eyes in turn, seeing my own weariness reflected there. We were at the end of our endurance, physically and mentally, and that was when mistakes were most likely to happen. "I know you're all desperately hoping this trail might lead to safety," I began gently, "and it very well may. But we need to approach it cautiously and stay alert for any signs it's a deception. The woods have played tricks on our senses before." They nodded, some casting uneasy glances at the surrounding trees as if seeing them for the first time as potential threats rather than simple plants. After a quick cold breakfast, we gathered our meager belongings and carefully made our way over to the mysterious path. Up close it remained overgrown and treacherous looking, with exposed roots and low-hanging branches obstructing the way. But it was unmistakably a trail, however faint, and our only potential lifeline out of this nightmare forest. I took the lead, treading lightly and scanning for any signs of deception or danger. The boys followed in a close, quiet knot, keeping their walking sticks at hand. Our eyes constantly roamed the shadowy trees, pressing in on either side, half expecting the benign trunks and branches to reach out and snatch one of us at any moment. The path held steady and true, angling gradually downhill through the sea of trees. After a few hours of hiking, the trail remained consistently narrow but discernible, spurred on by the ever so slightly brighter quality of light coming down through the rustling leaves ahead. It seemed we walked toward some far-off break in the emerald canopy, signaling a thinning of the woods. I hardly dared believe it could be true, after so many days wandering lost in endless identical forests. When we paused for a brief rest and meager lunch, I tried to raise the scout spirits with cautious encouragement. "I believe we're heading the right way," I said. "If we just follow this trail, it's bound to lead out of the woods eventually." Their faces brightened a bit at this, and talk turned hopeful for the first time in days as we continued on our way. We remained vigilant for any abrupt changes in the landscape or signs we were being turned back on ourselves somehow. But the trail held steady, inclining gradually uphill again as the afternoon wore on. By the time the light took on a golden late afternoon quality, filtered green through the leaves, we found ourselves cresting a ridge overlooking a wide valley. We hurried forward, hearts soaring at the sight of open sky at last, beyond the sea of undulating treetops. "We must be close to the edge of the woods now," Patrick exclaimed. The others traded relieved laughter, the prospect of freedom so near. Even I allowed a swell of hope, though my ever-cautious instincts kept my guard up, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Thus far, the path had led true, but when had the forest ever released its prey willingly? As dusk approached, the trail grew harder to follow, choked by thorny brush and fallen logs. We scrambled over and under obstacles until finally something up ahead caught my eye. A small cabin at the base of the ridge tucked among the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, signaling warmth and life. We all rushed forward desperately. Sanctuary was so achingly close. As we pounded up onto the porch, I reached the front door first, pounding urgently. After a tense pause, a stooped old man peered through the crack, eyebrows rising at the crowd of filthy, wild-eyed faces on his doorstep. "Please, you have to let us in. We've been lost in these woods for days," I implored. The man studied us critically before swinging the door wide in wordless invitation. We spilled inside, sinking to the floor in overwhelmed relief as the door clapped shut behind us, shutting out the twilight woods. "Don't mind the mess, just pushed my chair aside so you folks can rest," the old man said, clearing a space at a rough-hewn table scattered with books and gear. "Name's Ranger Joe. Let me grab some blankets." He shuffled deeper inside while I took quick stock of our cramped but comforting surroundings. The cabin was rustic and cluttered but sturdily built, with blackened iron cookware hanging over a stone hearth. Never had four walls, and a roof seemed like such a paradise. Once we had warm food and blankets, Ranger Joe sat down across from us and fixed me with a somber gaze. "Now then, suppose you tell me just what happened out there and how you folks ended up on my doorstep looking half dead." I hesitated, wondering just how much to reveal. But Joe's kind face and cabin had already earned my trust. Taking a deep breath, I began recounting our ill-fated journey. The survival excursion gone awry, the endless looping trails, vanishing scouts, and the lurking presence that had haunted us day and night. The words spilled out in a flood. I had not realized how heavy the burden of experience lay on me. The scouts occasionally chimed in to add chilling details, like the sight of trees moving on their own or the cries heard in the darkness. Joe listened intently, bushy eyebrows drawing together in concern but no skepticism showing in his weathered features. Finally, I stumbled to a stop. My heart still pounded thinking back on it all. "You can't say I'm much surprised," he muttered. "Always feels to me like something unnatural is afoot in portions of that forest." He shook his head as if to clear it. "But that's just foolish talk most would dismiss. You all are safe now." I leaned forward intently. "But have you ever seen signs of it yourself, of whatever haunts those woods?" I sensed this man knew more than he readily admitted. Joe held my gaze, perhaps gauging my sincerity and composure. Then he seemed to come to a decision. Standing stiffly, he signaled me to follow to a quiet corner while the scouts slept by the fire. "What I'm about to tell you stays strictly between us, you understand?" He waited for my fervent nod before continuing. "I've come across strange things in that wilderness, trails with no end, circles of stones in odd clearings, even footprints that vanish mid-stride." His eyes took on a distant cast as he described unnatural details I knew too well, evidence of a cunning force shaping the land itself, lying in wait for those who strayed unaware into its realm. But I know the woods better than most, and there are ancient powers that dwell in the untamed places of this earth still. Awful things sometimes happen out there, and not all of them have earthly explanations. He held my gaze for a moment, almost studying me. When we finally returned to the fire, I felt aged 100 years from what I'd just learned. That night at the ranger station was filled with awful dreams and sounds. That had me startling awake every few hours. Though we were safely sheltered within its wooden walls, my instincts remained on a razor's edge after so many days and nights spent at the mercy of the forest entity. Each creak and groan of the cabin had me bolting upright, convinced some presence lurked right outside our walls, waiting for us to let our guard down. Intellectually, I knew we were likely safe here, but try as I might, I could not shake the bone-deep sense of being watched through the shadows. The scouts seemed similarly affected, judging by their fitful turning in blankets on the floor next to me. I wondered if they too envisioned gnarled hands scraping at the windows whenever the wind gusted outside. Exhaustion dragged at our bodies, but our overstimulated nerves would grant little rest tonight. When the first light of dawn finally shined through the dirty window panes, we gave up any pretense of sleeping. Ranger Joe was soon stirring as well, preparing a small breakfast for us. The scouts gathered around eagerly as the rich aromas of frying meat and brewing coffee filled the small cabin. "Here you go. Eat up now," Joe said, handing out portions. The scouts' moods visibly lifted as hot food and caffeine worked their magic. With full bellies, talk soon turned to home. Joe had radioed for help yesterday evening, and search parties were apparently already combing the woods for us. I winced, imagining the panic our families must be enduring, assuming the worst by now. Help should be arriving soon, Joe told us reassuringly. Just need to sit tight until they get here. I nodded, though privately I wondered if we would ever truly leave these woods behind. Or if some essence of them was now lodged within us like a splinter under skin. Subtle but there. Around mid-morning, distant shouts and barking dogs echoed through the trees. Joe glanced up from cleaning his rifle with a grunt of satisfaction. Sounds like your ride out of here has arrived. We waited anxiously by the windows as the sounds of the search party drew nearer. 2 police officers and a fleet of volunteers burst into the clearing surrounding the cabin. Joe gave us an encouraging nod before stepping outside to inform them the lost group had been found. We hovered in the doorway as our saviors dismounted their horses and embraced us joyfully, some shedding tears of relief. But their ecstatic talking washed over me, muted and distant. My eyes were irresistibly drawn to the shadowy tree line behind them. For a moment I thought I glimpsed a darker shadow detach itself from the trees and stand upright. A shiver ran down my spine. Then Joe's hand was clasping my shoulder, gently but firmly guiding me toward the horses waiting to take us far from this place. I blinked, and when I glanced back, there was nothing but wind-stirred branches where the shadow had stood. Numb, I allowed myself to be boosted into a saddle. Joe gave me a meaningful look that said, "Speak nothing of what you saw." Then we were off. The scouts and I were surrounded protectively by our rescuers as we left the cursed forest behind. But though the sun was warm on our faces, a cold weight nestled deep within my chest. I have not set foot among those woods since that day, and I doubt I ever will again. My encounter with black-eyed kids. Please share. I'd like to know other people's thoughts. Thank you. First, a quick intro about myself. I'm a 26-year-old male. I work at a small private college in Michigan. I'm a normal, average guy. I like hockey, HBO shows, kayaking, and hiking camping. I have a girlfriend, love my dad and sister, and have a pet dog named Bear. While I keep an open mind, I don't believe in ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot, and am not even too sure about God. The way I see it, if I haven't encountered it firsthand or seen documented, verifiable proof, then I keep a healthy amount of skepticism. There is one thing I do believe in now that I never did before. Hell, I didn't even know about it before black freaking eye kids. As I said earlier, I love Ed to hike and camp. For reasons too introspective to get into fully here, I just loved the solitude, peace, and serenity the outdoors provided me. My life is not overly stressful, chaotic, or dramatic, but every once in a while a man needs to get away from it all. Being alone in the wilderness gave me the opportunity to clear my head, be introspective, consider the facts of life. I loved the beauty of the natural world, and I try to appreciate the small and big things, from the smallest clover to the biggest mountain. Beauty is all around us. In a way, I think it's my belief in beauty that has helped me cope as well as I have with what I'm about to share. In late August of 2010, I set out for Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore located along Lake Michigan. I had scheduled 5 days off of work and I planned on making the most of it. Sleeping Bear is one of my favorite parks in Lower Michigan. I know it to be a great place for some solitude, and having usually been abandoned by sun worshippers, by mid-August I knew I'd have most of the park to myself. So I wasn't surprised when I arrived the 5th day, found my usually parking spot, a sand parking lot just yards from the lake, and didn't see another person. As I sat on the hood of my car overlooking the beach and the lake, I remember breathing deeply and saying aloud, "Thank God for solitude." I ate lunch, walked down the beach, and put my bare feet into the water. Cold, very cold. It didn't matter to me though, because I didn't come to swim. I came to hike and to camp. I came to, as was my tradition, sit by a warm fire on a cool night, sipping on my flask of whiskey, enjoying the sounds of the forest. However, this peaceful tradition didn't happen. The proper procedure when camping at a state or national park, if you've never been, is to check in at a ranger station. There you pay your fees, obtain your backcountry pass, if you're going to be camping in the backcountry as I always do, and give the rangers your information, license plate number, make and model of your car, etc. After my quick stop off at the beach to eat my lunch, I headed to the nearby, a 15 or so minute drive, and get my affairs in order. The Platte River Ranger Station is manned until mid-October, I think, so it was open and I didn't have to travel to the main station a 1.5 hours drive north, I park in the station's parking lot and walk into the office. The ranger and I spoke for a little and he asks me for my license plate number. I knew he was going to ask, but I still forgot to write it down before I went in. So I walk back out toward my car and I see two kids sitting at a bench just in front of where I'm parked. They weren't there when I parked, and I didn't notice them when I walked into the station. But at this point in time, I'm still on cloud nine. I'm happy to be on vacation, so I take no real notice. I walk to the back of my car, jot down the license plate number, and walk back to office. I take care of business in the office and step out and walk to the connecting bathroom. The backcountry area I'm staying at, White Pine, has a pit toilet. Think Porta John, but just with a deep hole in the ground. But I'd like to use a real bathroom while I can. I go into the restroom and go into the empty stall. As I'm taking care of my business, I hear the bathroom door open. I hear whispered voices. It's a small bathroom, but I can't make out what the voices are saying. I can tell they're kids' voices, though, and I figure it's the kids I saw near my car earlier. No biggie, right? I finish up and open the stall door. Sure enough, there are the two kids standing outside the stall. I remember saying, "It's all yours." As I walked to the sink, the kids just stood there. When you think about it now, in reading, the situation seems a little spooky. But at the time, and if you were in the situation yourself, I'd bet that you wouldn't be the slightest bit worried, and neither was I. I was my hands and glance in the mirror, only to notice the kids are looking right at me. This is the first time, but certainly not the last time, on this trip that my spine tingles with fear. The goddamn kids have completely black eyes, no whites to their eyes at all. Like I said, this is a pretty small bathroom and they were not more than 3 feet away. At first I can't do or say anything. I am literally frozen with fear. The water runs over my hands, but I can't feel it. I'm so deep inside my head at this moment that all I can hear are my thoughts, which were something like, "Ah." All joking aside, I was petrified. It was only when one of the kids, a brown-haired boy that I would guess was around 12, took a step toward me that my fight or flight instincts took over control from my fear. I turned off the water. Why I bothered, I don't know, habit I guess, and moved a step back from the kids and toward the door. Seemingly sensing my fear, the boy didn't take another step toward me. Instead, he stopped. On retrospect, I can guess he was trying to keep from frightening me too much. "Didn't work, kid. Can you help us?" That's what the boy said when one of us finally spoke. For a moment, I did want to help. I consider myself a pretty nice guy. I'd go out of my way to help pregnant women carry groceries to their car. I'd rescue cats from trees if the situation arose, and for a while I thought that is why I wanted to help those creepy kids. I thought my sheer decency was what made me, despite my better judgment, and despite my fear, want to help them. Only since I began researching the Becks do I realize that I didn't want to help those kids. But whatever, magical, mystical voodoo, power, they have made me want to help them. I can't tell you with any certainty how long I stood motionless thinking about helping those kids, but it seemed like an eternity. Finally, like a physical shaking of my brain, I said, "No, not right now. I gotta go." And then I left the bathroom. I remember in that 2 seconds my back was turned on those kids to me leaving the bathroom. I felt certain I was going to die. I thought as soon as my back was turned, they were going to tear me to shreds. It was with knee-buckling relief that I left the bathroom and walked out into the midday sun. I walked the 15 or so feet to my car on noodle-like legs, too afraid to look behind me. I fumbled for my keys and unlocked my door, sat down, closed the door, and locked it. Only then, in the safety of my locked car, did I feel safe enough to look back toward the bathroom. Damned if the little bastards weren't standing just outside the bathroom staring at me with the big black soul-sucking eyes. I want to take a moment to explain a little bit more about myself. I'm not a big man, but I'm not small either. I'm 6 foot with shoes on, I always say, and I'm around 185 pounds. What I'm saying is I can take a couple 12-year-olds in a fight. I assume, having never actually fought any 12-year-olds since I was 12 myself. In my hiking, I've encountered odd people before. I've turned a bend in a trail only to startle a huge grizzly bear. I've been lost once and ran out of water. Once. And I even had a tree fall in the middle of my campsite during a gale-swept night in Tennessee as I was drifting off to sleep. However, not a single event in my life scared me nearly as much as those kids. So there I am, in my car, staring at those kids, and them staring at me. I can't take my stare away from them, and they start from my car. Startled to my senses, I turn the key, throw it in reverse, and get the hell out of there. I drive off, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I know that if I do look back that I'll see those black eyes looking back at me. I turn onto the main road and head the short drive north to my campsite. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell are you still camping? To be honest, I can't tell you why. I was just so much in shock that I wasn't really thinking. It wasn't until I was parked in the sand lot, at the head of the White Pine Trail, that my brain started functioning again. The drive home would only take 3 hours. I could make it home in time for dinner, but for some reason I talked myself out of it. Sitting in my car in the sun on the beach has a way of taking away all bad feelings. I just talked away my better judgment. I won't be doing that again. It's around 3 o'clock and I know that the sun will start to set in around 3 or 4 hours, so I know I should head toward my camping spot. It's not a very long walk from the parking lot to the White Pine Backcountry Campground, but it will take around 45 minutes, leaving me just a couple hours to set up camp, gather firewood, cook dinner, and eat before nightfall. Fuck it, I remember saying to myself. I get my pack out of my back seat and take off down the trail. Now there are 2 ways to access the White Pine Campground from where I was parked. I could either head through the woods or I could walk along the beach. The wooded trail is quicker and shorter, and the beach trail is harder on the legs and lungs. Walking with a 50-pound pack in the sand is no picnic. However, considering what I just went through, I decided to go along the beach. It was the more open, brighter, kinder trail. To reach the campsite from the beach trail, you have to turn away from the lake and go about 1/2 a mile into the woods. Reaching my campsite, I find it unfortunately completely empty. The campground has 7 sites, I think, and not a one of them was taken. Usually this would be a happy thing to me, but this time I wished for all my might for a little company. I pick a site hidden fairly well from the trail, feeling that I didn't need anyone walking along to spot my tent. I unpack and set up my ultralight 1-person tent, put down my sleeping pad, and unroll my 0-degree rated mummy bag. Taking my walking stick, a sawed-off hockey stick, and a folding knife with me, I head into the forest to gather firewood. I pile up a good-sized pile, 3 times larger than I think I'll need, and proceed to light a fire. I cook my food and eat, all the while watching the sun set through the trees. What is normally a beautiful, warming sight to me, now only brings dread. I do not want to be out here, I suddenly realize. I finish eating quickly and decide to gather even more firewood. I do not want to run out in the middle of the night. As the darkness descends upon the woods in my campsite, I get the fire going and riffle through my pack looking for my flask. This was a situation that called for a little liquid courage. I hit it hard. In the woods, the sun sets at first slower than you think, and then near the end it just kind of falls out of the sky and is gone in a blink. So it did that night. Sitting next to the fire, I decide to move my tent closer to me. So I click on my flashlight and move my tent until it is right behind the small bench next to the fire ring. I like having the tent behind me, protecting my back as I saw it. I'm glad I decided to gather more firewood because I'm burning through it quickly, keeping the fire as high as I am. Even though it is early autumn and the temperature was probably in the 40s, I was hot sitting so close to such a big fire. Part of getting away from it all for me is to leave my phone in the car. In civilization, I don't use a watch. I just look at my cell. However, this night I wish I had my cell on me, not to call someone there is no service, but to check the time. I wanted it to be late. I wanted the night to fly by and give me the security of morning. I finished the whiskey and wished that I had brought the bottle with me from the car. The spirits had done their job though, and I was a bit calmer. Also, praise be to God, I was feeling sleepy too. Though the rules say, don't go to bed with your fire burning, I sure as hell was not going to sleep without the fire. I got in my tent, leaving the flap open with just the bug flap closed, so I could see the fire, and tried to sleep. I don't know how long I lay there before slept found me, but I did eventually drift off. Thankfully, I can't remember having any dreams. I woke to a dead fire and the early dusk light coming in. I have to say I was slightly surprised to be alive. As dawn turned in today, I felt more and more foolish for the fear I felt yesterday. Being a usually calm, cool, and collected guy, I couldn't explain the intense dread and fear I felt when I saw those kids, but I did my best to ignore it, and I explained away their eyes pretty easily. I told myself the kids were camping at the Platte River campground. Same location as the ranger station I registered at. They had some colored contact lenses and were playing a joke. Simple, possible, even probably considering the alternative. I ate breakfast and then made upon hindsight, horrible decision. I decided to stay another night. After breakfast, I gathered firewood so that I wouldn't have to gather any when I got back for the evening. My pile of wood at a towering height, I hiked back to my car, along the wooded trail. I was feeling awfully stupidly brave that morning. I arrived at my car and decided to go to the dune climb. The dune climb is a trail that begins at a towering dune and ends 1.5 miles away at Lake Michigan. This hike was uneventful, but beautiful, providing me even more determination not to let myself be scared off by some stupid kids with contact lenses. I got back to my car from the round-trip hike right around 1 o'clock. I got out my small camp stove and cooked some soup. Finished with lunch, I decided that next I would take the scenic drive. I forget the name of the road, that is part of the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. It's a winding drive with several scenic and educational pull-offs. It's relaxing and beautiful. I finished with that around 3 o'clock, and I decided I would head to Traverse City, just a 45-minute drive away, and do a little shopping and grab an early dinner at a nice steakhouse. This is not something I normally do while camping, but after the previous night's events, I decided to treat myself. Traverse City is a nice town to visit, if you ever have the chance. Just a recommendation. I went to this steakhouse just outside of Traverse around 4:30, figuring a quick dinner and 45-minute drive and an hour walk would get me to my camp at just about dusk. But that's not what happened. The restaurant was packed. I got a table fairly quickly, but the service was very slow. In the end, I didn't get out of the restaurant until dusk. Cursing myself, it began to rain as I drove back to the trailhead parking lot. By the time I was at the lot and parked, it was full-blown nighttime. Sitting in the parking lot, listening to the wind and the rain, I was pretty damn scared again. I think that if nearly all of my gear wasn't still at the campsite, then I would have just drove home and said screw it. However, I couldn't abandon several $100s worth of camping equipment because I was scared. I'm not a pussy. I gear up. Flashlight, pocket knife, water bottle, headlamp, and walking stick. Again, I had two options, through the woods or along the beach. The storm clouds blocked out most of the star and moonlight, so I would have been kidding myself to think that the beach would have been better lit. But it was still more open, and provided me with a better feeling, so I took the beach path. The path is only 1.5 miles long along the beach, and then another 1/2 mile into the woods to the campsite. I figured if I hustled, I could be at my campsite in just over 1/2 an hour. I turn on my headlamp and move off down the beach. The wind is hitting pretty hard, and it's pretty damn cold, but I'm prepared. My coat has a nice rain shell and I'm not getting too wet. Hiking in the dark is not smart in the best of circumstances. In this area there are cougars and bear, both rare, but the real danger is getting lost, or stumbling over something and injuring yourself. However, I wasn't too worried about any of that. The animals are so rare in that area, it'd take very bad luck to get bothered by them, and the beach was clear of most debris that I might trip on. What had me worried was a creeping sensation of paranoia. As I walked, the sensation of paranoia and dread grew. I stopped every 10 feet or so to look around, lighting the tall grass, next to the beach and before the woods, with my headlamp. I opened my jaw and listened. You can hear better with your mouth slightly open, but I saw nothing and heard nothing. I'd walk another 10 feet and just know that someone was watching me. It was hard to hear anything over the lapping waves of the lake and the howling wind of the storm. But I swear I heard voices in the tall grass. I'd been walking probably 1-2 an hour, and I knew I would be meeting off with the trail leading into the woods, and to my campsite any second now. But then my world fell apart. Having one of my strongest moments of feeling watched, I turned around, facing the direction I came, and there they were. The boy who spoke to me earlier couldn't have been more than 5 feet away, and the other boy, the quiet boy, was standing slightly behind him. Each of the boys stood motionless, staring, just staring. At this moment, I'm not sure I have the ability to put my terror into words. The best way I can describe it is to say I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was in the hospital and the doctor just told me I had moments to live. The talkative boy moved toward me. The only light on the beach came from my headlamp. Neither kid had any sort of flashlight. My LED beam flashed across their faces, reflecting grotesquely in their large dark eyes. The waves crashed, and the wind blew. "Help us!" I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The boy moved closer. The quiet boy stepped to the side, almost like he was slowly circling behind me, and that broke the spell. "I'm not fucking helping you," I said. "We're lost. We can't find our campsite." "Is this a game?" I asked, even though I knew it wasn't. "Take us with you, please. We'll die out here. We're afraid." I called bullshit on that one. "They're scared," I thought to myself. "I'm scared. You're the one with the creepy eyes, the vacant hollow voices. You're the ones with the fisheye stare." The quiet boy moved a little more. He was now standing beside me, just a couple feet away. The talkative boy was still in front of me, blocking the way I had come, blocking the path back to my car. Then things got even weirder. "Okay, you can come with me," I said. I don't even remember thinking the words. They just came out. The talkative boy smiled and he reached to take my hand. The fight or flight response hit me so hard it was like a physical punch to the stomach. I recoiled at the sight of this little monster trying to take my hand. Before I even realize it, I'm running down the beach. I'm sprinting away from the little bastards, and my car as fast as I can. I don't look behind me. I don't know if they're following me or not, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I need to run faster. I'm in decent shape, but given any normal circumstance, I would never have been able to run so quickly for so long on a beach. My headlamp bouncing up and down, I see the offshoot trail leading from the beach into the woods. Without much thought, if any, I take the trail and head into the woods. My senses finally returning to me, I jump off the trail and move a little ways into the woods. I turn off my headlamp and lie down among some tall grass. I watch the trail, waiting to see the kids following. I waited in the rain and cold for God knows how long. A couple hours at least. No kids. The cold was slowly creeping in. I wasn't sure if I was shivering because of the adrenaline, the fear, or the cold, but I do know I was starting to freeze. I had to leave my concealment and make way to shelter. I had two options: the tent and sleeping bag or the car. The car meant safety. It meant home. However, it also meant that I would have to walk a mile and a half, in the dark with God knows who or what waiting for me. The tent meant warmth and shelter from the elements. It meant exposure to the kids. If the kids knew where I was hiking and when, then they'd know where I was camping. Right? It was an impossible decision. It was a choice of the lesser of two evils. I chose the tent. I just couldn't force myself to go back along the wooded trail, and I sure as hell wasn't going back along the beach. I crossed my fingers and prayed that the little bastards didn't know where my tent was. I got up, found the trail, and sprinted the 1/2 mile to the campground. As I ran, a thought occurred. Maybe someone will have hiked in during the way. Maybe I'll have company. There was no life at the campground. When I arrived at the campground, I made a wide circle of it, looking both for other campers and for the little devils. I saw nothing and no one. I made my way as quietly as possible to my tent. I unzipped the fly and crawled in. I thought briefly about a fire, but decided that would be more of a signal to the kids than deterrence. My clothes were sopping wet and I was still very cold. I had to take them off. My pack is leaning against a tree about 15 feet from my tent. Inside are clean, dry clothes, sealed tightly in a wet bag. However, now that I'm inside the tent, I'm sure as hell not going back out. The tent gave me some sense of security, even though it wasn't in any way secure. Now naked, I crawl inside my mummy bag. I'd like to say how much I hate that it's called a mummy bag. After a few moments, I warm up, but the shivering takes another 1-3 hour or so to subside. As I'm lying there, I'm wishing so much that I had that bottle of whiskey in my car. The rain plays against the leaves of the trees, and the wind creaks the branches. Under the best of circumstances, this is a night where a person's mind can get away from them. For me, it was utter terror. My imagination made every creak, every howl of the wind into something sinister. As the hours passed and my adrenaline faded, I felt immensely tired. I wanted so badly just to fall asleep. In sleep, I wouldn't know I was being eviscerated. I'd either wake up or I wouldn't. I thought it was a nightmare at first. When I heard the voice say something, I thought I was dreaming. But then sleep cleared from my head and I realized I was awake. It was still night and the storm was still biting. "Help us," an unmistakable voice said. I couldn't help it. It was a gut reaction. I screamed. I lay naked, my mummy bag zipped up to my chin. I was completely helpless. I felt like a newborn baby, my fate completely held in the hands of others. "Please let us in." "No," I screeched, and then again, "No." "It's so cold. Please let us in, mister." I stopped replying and could only sob, like a heartbroken teenage girl, like a woman who just learned her sister died. I sobbed. I was so uncontrollably scared that I think it helped me not pay attention to the kids' demands, at least not fully. "Let us in." I tugged the pull string on the hood of my mummy bag until I was completely enveloped. I just kept repeating, not daring to listen to the kids, the word no. No, 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 no. I waited for death. I knew it was coming. Any second and I'd be ripped to shreds. The kid kept saying something, but I wasn't listening. I wouldn't listen. I knew how overwhelming their hypnotic power was. I did everything I could not to listen. I kept chanting my mantra, kept howling my nose. I don't know when I fell asleep, but the next thing I know, I startle awake. The sun is shining and I'm alive. I don't know how, but I'm alive. I look around my small tent and I don't see anything amiss on the inside. It takes me several minutes to gather the courage necessary to unzip the tent fly, but finally I do. I peek my head out, but see no one. Naked, I run to my pack and grab my clothes in the dry bag. I toss some clothes on and race back to the tent. I tear it down in a matter of moments. I pack my sleeping bag and pad and tent onto my pack and take off down the trail. I decide one more time to take the beach trail. In the sun and warmth of the morning, it's an entirely different trail. The only moment I'm given pause is when I come across a duck with what seems to be its heart torn out. I took a photo with a disposable camera in my pack and move on. I arrive at my car and find it unmolested. I get in and drive home. It's been almost 2 entire months since this happened, but I still remember it all like it was yesterday. I haven't gone camping since, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe hiking again. Maybe I'll go camping again sometime in the future, but I'm bringing a friend. No more going it alone. I, thankfully, haven't seen any more black eye kids. I don't want to posit on what they are. I don't want to think about whether they are demons or monsters, aliens or hybrids. I was interested at first. I did some research because I wanted to know if I was crazy. I don't care what you think they are. I don't care why they are. I just wanted to know that I wasn't the only one who has had this experience. I'm not, and I'm thankful for that. My advice, if you ever do encounter a Beck, don't listen to it to speak. Don't be polite in case they're just weird kids. Don't question their validity. Don't worry about looking silly or that others will think you're crazy. Just run. Run and don't look back. Hey my dear friends, if you're finding joy in our content and would like to support our channel, please contemplate subscribing and hitting that like button. Your support means the world to us and will enable us to bring forth more captivating and fresh content. And a beautiful comment as striking as the beauty of your eyes, my handsome friend, would truly touch our hearts.